Afternoon.
No,
Um,
not yet, not yet.
sorry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new session with Brighton Responsibilities Awareness Initiative. Today, we are lucky again to have Ernest Johansson to talk to us about the mental health maintenance. Ernest, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very passionate about this stuff.
So, what do we have today, sir?
So we're going to talk about one of my actually favorite things to talk about, which is mental health maintenance. Um, and the reason being is a lot of times when I'm asked to talk, I tend to get drawn in about crisis and suicide prevention and like structural barriers to mental health wellness. And there isn't always a lot of talk about like what it looks like to procure and maintain good mental health. And a lot of the time in general, we don't think about mental health until it becomes a problem. And the analogy that I always use is that it wouldn't make sense to only brush your teeth when you have a cavity. You need to maintain. So you could call this mental health flossing. And basically, the basic premise of the talk I'm about to give is that there's certain elements of things that you can have in your life that um, produce good mental health as a baseline. And a lot of the time, people will have a lot of these in their life and maybe just not recognize how related it is to mental health. And then a lot of the time, there may be some things that people could do that kind of safeguards themselves against mental health pitfalls. Now, a couple things to be clear about before I get started. One, um, basic human needs, food, clothing, shelter. If you don't have those, mental health is going to be a tall task. And oftentimes when I speak or if I am in conversation with other members of the community in different organizations, I'll get asked, what could we do to help mental health in London or Southwestern Ontario or the world? What's the number one thing we could do to improve mental health? And I would say, make a living wage standard, make the ability to procure sustainable food standard and housing standard that would up the baseline of mental health everywhere. So I like to caveat this discussion of mental health maintenance with that information because that's still required. And we can't really get around that. People need their basic needs met in order to live mentally well. And then another caveat is that what I'm about to talk about are kind of guidelines as opposed to an absolute. What might work for me might look different than what works for you or your neighbor or your grandfather or your aunt or what have you. These are just general guidelines. But it is important to think about mental health in terms of what is sustainable for maintaining mental health and not just when someone has a problem or an episode. Also, another caveat that I should throw out there before we get started, there are times in any human being's life where mental health is going to be a challenge. Death of a loved one, a significant move, end of a long-term relationship, a career change or sudden job loss. Um, and also in our statistics at the crisis center, um, before COVID, we'd have about 80 to 90 or so crisis phone calls a day. And after COVID, we average about 180. And that number has never gone down. But there are global events that will impact the amount of mental distress as well. So, with those caveats being said, if it's okay, I'd like to share a graphic called the Mental Health All Stars. And what this is kind of these are 12 facets of mental health maintenance that are useful and kind of in your own life, checking in with yourself around what's going on in your everyday life that is good for your mental health. So I'm going to pull up that graphic. Found it. All right. Can everyone see? Can that be seen? I think that can.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So they look like 12 like lucha libre characters, and it's designed to be kind of funny and fun. And they're all different aspects of mental health. And usually when I presented this to like a client or to workers about how to procure their mental health, when there might be vicarious trauma or what have you, we go through all 12 and provide a basic definition. And before I go into it as well, I'd like to add that no one is going to be hitting it out of the box 10 out of 10 on all 12 of these. Like no one is going to be perfect A+ scale on all 12 of these. It just doesn't happen. However, with that said, I'd like to go through them relatively quickly and then kind of explain kind of an activity you can do with yourself that can, um, you know, kind of really refine your basic day-to-day mental health practice. So the first one is creative outlet. And as all of them, it's all relatively individual. If you're a musician, it can be playing music or even just listening to music. If you're a chef, it can be cooking. I'm not a chef or a musician, so those would not be creative outlets for me unless I really learned those skills. If you write. If you draw, or it can be simply, if you're inclined in math, it can be solving math problems in a creative fashion, whatever that might be. The point is, creative outlet is part of um, a part of your brain that if you stimulate it on a regular basis, it does help your mental health. The next one is similar. It's exercise, and it's all, again, individualized. If someone's a marathon runner, getting them to walk around the block isn't going to be significant in terms of, exercise that would really tap into producing dopamine and kind of generally feeling good. But if someone's couch bound, that would be a viable goal. And again, it's very individual. And actually, the exercise piece, I've talked about this a few times in my professional life, but um, mental health outcomes when people have a regular exercises regularly part of their life are so much better. Um, in particular, in addictions treatment, the recidivism rate or relapse rate of people in long-term treatment, if they exercise on a regular basis, is about 2% of the number that people would relapse if they don't exercise on a regular basis. So it has a huge, that's based on a study at the University of Edinburgh, but that has a huge impact on people. And then there's routine, and it's basically, and keep in mind, this is a guideline. It doesn't have to be um, absolutely set in stone, but knowing what to expect. I get up every day at whatever time, 6, 7, 8, whatever time you get up. You do basically the same things at the same time on a given day. Obviously, myself included, those of us who work, there's variability in that schedule, but you have a standard routine that you stick to in order to kind of know what to expect. And again, there's variability and adjustability in that. Sleep. Most people in North America do not sleep enough. And that's anywhere from 7 to 9 hours for most adults. REM sleep is when your brain physically repairs itself. And there's a lot of mental health conditions that are extremely exacerbated by a lack of sleep. Um, if people use stimulants, for instance, their REM sleep is significantly damaged, and that can cause psychosis. Um, and that is not actually the substance so much as it is the lack of REM sleep or high quality sleep. Now, the next one is meditation. And this is one where people get, I have to define it really well, and it's very, very individualized. If one prays, it can be prayer. If one actually meditates, it can be analogous to Fabio sitting on the top of a mountain, but it certainly doesn't have to be. Um, if it basically what we're looking for is the capacity to focus on something and calm one's mind and take agency over where their mind is going. In other words, sitting and quietly contemplating, focusing on one thought is builds a skill set of taking charge of your thoughts in your head, and it builds a skill set of when there's a negative thought, recognizing for what it is, acknowledging it, and then letting it go. And that just generally is a mentally healthy skill set to have. And also there's social activities, the next one, more so in the US, but a lot of times in the West, as it were. Um, there is this narrative of, an admirable man is this solo lone wolf cowboy. And that really is rather unnatural to the basic human condition. We are designed to be social beings. It is important for us to be involved in community. It is important for us to most people have multiple communities. I have my family, I have my coworkers, I have the staff I work with, I have people with common interests where I'm from, I have people I've met here in Canada. Um, and the point is, having social groups and social activity is incredibly important for our well-being. Human beings are by nature social beings. And without that, we are going to suffer mentally. The next one is healthy diet. And basically, again, there's a lot of different ways to eat healthy. There are, human beings live in every corner of the world, and part of that is because it's possible to procure a healthy diet based upon the plant and animal life basically everywhere in the world. Sometimes it's extreme, but the point is eating healthy is relatively individual in terms of where your community is, in terms of where your ancestors are from, and in terms of culturally what people eat. But having a healthy diet can be done in basically any of those environments. And um, our body works better when we eat healthy. In the summertime, I encounter a lot of kids who are out of school who have been eating like pop and candy all summer, and it does impact their well-being. So whatever a healthy diet might be for you, maintaining that is important for your mental health. The next one, and I kind of like how this character is like dropping a flying elbow while wearing heart-covered tights. And it's love. It can be love for an activity, love for a community, romantic love, familial love, love for an entity. Having that meaningful feeling towards whatever entity, uh, romantic partner, your family, etc., is incredibly important for our mental health. And some people struggle with that for various reasons. The sociology of poverty, the sociology of addiction makes that all the much harder as well, and hence the preamble about basic needs being important for mental health as well. The next two are sun and air. And physiologically, we are all kind of, as our ancestors were many thousands of years ago, being outside in the environment is normal to us and healthy for us. And, seasonal affective disorder is a very much a real entity. Um, Blue Monday is the first Monday in January in Canada because of the weather, or I'm sorry, the third Monday in January. Um, and it's harder to get in the sun and air at that time, and it does have an impact on the mood, on one's general mood. And building in avenues to have sun and air in your life on a regular basis, like going out in nature, is incredibly good for your mental health. The next one is humor, and I like how the character is wearing a Groucho Marx mask. Um, and I'm a little bit older, but so sometimes when I talk to people, they don't know who Groucho Marx was. Basically, he's a comedian in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Um, and the mask of that funny nose, glasses, and eyebrows is a staple of Groucho Marx. And humor, it releases dopamine when you laugh. It builds social bonds. It's generally good for you. And the last one there, and given my profession, I think this is kind of funny. They make him into a zombie-looking character, but therapy. And therapy is very different from social relationships or talking to a friend or a loved one about a problem, because in those relationships, there is reciprocity. There is, um, there's a give and take to the relationship in which the subject of what you're saying isn't the entirety of the interaction. When I talk to one of my friends who I was talking to earlier today, he lives in Richmond Hill in Toronto, and we talk about things, and there's a reciprocity of like I talk about this, I give him feedback on that, he talks to me about something, gives me feedback on something, and there's a back and forth. With therapy, that doesn't really happen in the same way. There's rapport building, but it is about the client or the individual's challenges, problems, whatever they want to work through. And the reciprocity doesn't really, it's not the same piece. So therapy is very different than interacting with friends because um you are trying to, it's just about the speaker's problems and challenges, and the therapist or the listener um, is providing validation and feedback, and there isn't that reciprocity. In other words, if I was, performing a therapy session right now, whomever was talking to me, it wouldn't be about me at all. I would try and be as reflective and as neutral as possible and give my professional expertise about one's well-being. And it wouldn't be about them commenting on the shirt I'm wearing or my haircut or whatever it is. So those are kind of 12 facets. And when I do work with clients around this, or anyone really, what we will do is pick, once we've defined them, as I just did, we'll pick two or three in which someone wants to try something new or try and improve. And then typically if we're having ongoing sessions, we will pick two or three that they can pick an achievable goal that can be achieved by our next session. So for instance, um, with social activity, it could be simply picking a goal that is socially, I'm going to do this before, I come back and have another session. Or for exercise, I'm going to walk around the block 3 times every day before our next session. Something that is achievable and provide some form of momentum about that goal. And long story short, there is no one way to be mentally healthy. There is rather many ways to be mentally healthy. We all have different communities, different backgrounds, different interests, different abilities. Um, but these are just some kind of basic tenets to be a guideline about, what's in your life day to day, week to week, month to month, um, that maintains your mental health. We all have stressors, we all have tasks, we all have things to do that are straining for us. And a lot of times it gets lost to do things that kind of up or fill our cup. And sometimes activities are a little of both. Like I have children and I love my children. I love being with my children. But sometimes when I have to do some of the harder tasks about parenting, or my wife and I do, as much as I love my children, it's hard and it's stressful and draining. And so it's a matter of us doing other things in our lives that maintain our well-being. So yeah, now, um, so that's kind of mental health maintenance, that piece of it. And as I said before, oftentimes this gets lost in we're so focused on crisis, we're so focused on when things go wrong, we're so focused on maybe archetypes of mental health. And I think it's very important to also note that mental health isn't just, someone you may see downtown who's really clearly struggling with addictions and they might have schizoaffective features. Clearly, they have mental health needs and there's basic needs to be taken care of as well there. And certainly they can be helped. But everyone can be helped when they struggle. And we may have varying degrees of privilege. A lot of times I'll tell people in session that, hey, if you have safe water and a roof over your head, you're in the most privileged, roughly 30% of the world's population. And I think that's roughly true. But if someone in that position struggles, they're still worthy of help. They're just as worthy as anyone else of help. And conversely, someone who doesn't have, safe water and a roof over their head, they are just as worthy of help. But a lot of times we get really focused on mental health when it's kind of separated from us, but really it's all of us that need help on our mental health and habits and routines that improve our mental health. So yeah, that's a little bit of a shorter kind of introduction. I think this would probably do well with questions, but yeah. So does anyone have any thoughts around that piece?
Well, thank you, Ernest, for this. So I do actually have a comment and then a question.
For
So the
sure.
comment where I've got from your presentation that, well, mental health is not some sort of luxury. It's an essential thing to be in, regardless of Maslow pyramids of needs, where, home, shelter, food could be essential, but also in order to maintain, keep going through, in order to maintain the effort
Mhm.
moving towards those, you will need a sustainable mental health. So it's not something that could be considered as a luxury thing. It's an essential thing.
Yeah, I would agree. It's absolutely essential. The reason I bring up housing and such is because that provides such a barrier to people having functional mental health when they don't have basic needs met that often individuals who are underhoused, for instance, will come up in the mental health system and especially in the mental health crisis system disproportionately so. And they will have significant mental health challenges, but it'd be very hard for them to move forward until we procure housing. There are some things we can do, mind you, and certainly anyone who came to, say, the crisis center who was underhoused, we would do our best to help them with whatever we could. But the sustaining mental health without appropriate housing is incredibly hard. And so it's an extra barrier. That's not to say that anyone's undeserving or anything like that, but it's simply to say that um, it provides more obstacles than people who do have housing face.
100%. So now let's came to my question. In all, how you will choose between those different characters?
Um,
Based on what? If you can just give us a clue or hint.
well, basically, it's where your interest lies is the best way to do it. Sometimes I use the analogy, just, pick the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. If you are interested in art, then let's explore the creative outlet piece. If you are interested in, playing soccer, let's pursue the exercise piece. And a lot of times, one activity will lead into several others. Going for a hike outside with friends, that knocks off social activity, physical activity, sun and air. That's four of them right there. Um, but really, my suggestion would be if you're starting to tackle some of those facets, um, going for what immediately fits your interest or a couple things that immediately fit your interest is best. And kind of going from there. Uh, I mean, for me personally, the hardest one is the meditation piece because, I mean, I have ADHD. Having a calm mind is very, very hard for me. And certainly, I'm middle-aged and I've learned coping mechanisms over the years, but sitting and contemplating one thought is incredibly challenging for me. So, the bar is going to be lower for me. So what meditation looks like for me is simply sitting with a calm mind for 5 minutes. And I actually knew a guy who was a Buddhist monk for some time, eventually walked away from it. They'd meditate for 2, 3 hours at a time in some of the camps he went
Mhm.
to. And so his skill set in that is very different. But I digress. It is what interests you and then also something that is achievable. Um, my mom would not be able to run a marathon. She's an older lady with diabetes. That's just not a realistic piece for her. But
Mhm.
um,
For
someone
someone
who,
who is younger, with
yeah,
capabilities, with energy, they can do. Yeah, 100%
yeah.
agree.
So it fits your interest and your skill level.
Okay, so how we can enhance the initiative? Because if you didn't have the collaboration from the one who is within the scope of mental health crisis or mental health
Mhm.
issue, if they did not collaborate, if they did came to you seeking for help, then I don't think you can take the horse to the river, but
Oh
it's
yeah.
impossible to force it. So my question is how we can enhance the initiative for people around us. So, for example, if I saw someone in my household or within my work place that they've got some stuff, so what is the best way to enhance their initiative to go and seek the help from professionals just like yourself?
Um, One of the basic tenets of mental health treatment or social work is that you have to go to where clients are emotionally, intellectually, um, in their willingness to engage and simply engage on their terms. So, uh, if someone doesn't want to see a professional, simply put, dragging them to a professional would not work. And when I did addictions therapy or addictions counseling, I would have some clients who were told by a court they had to see me. And, I'd have sessions with them, but I'd be very honest. I'm like, if you don't want to be here, I'm not going to beat around the bush and we'll engage with each other, but I'm not going to make you want to be here. And that did a couple of things. It was very honest and generally clients, I think everyone, but engaging with a client, engaging with them honestly is highly important and people respect that. And B, it actually fostered people in that honesty, in that honest engagement. It fostered people being more likely to engage. There was no power dynamic. There was no power struggle. It's like, hey, I'm here. Let's talk. If you want to engage about this stuff, that's great. If not, I'm not going to take it personal. I'm going to meet you where you're at in terms of discussion. And it could be the, I had one client who was court ordered to see me, and all we did was simply talk about baseball for about 6 weeks until he finally started wanting to talk to me about substances. And so, to answer your question um, more directly, I would think making the services and the mental health interventions as unintimidating as possible. People are going to be scared to do new things. Obviously, there are situations where there's biases and stigmas associated with mental health. I mean, very true across a lot of dynamics and across a lot of facets of identity. but make it as non-threatening as possible. And I mean, simply put, just going and being a safe person to talk to starts people on those steps to getting mental health help. You know, it can be as simple as just like asking someone how they're doing and then letting and being a safe place to talk. No judgment, no, nothing but listening and reflecting. Um, I think a lot of times people have this expectation of mental health engagement as being kind of like I'm going to wave a magic wand, tell you what to do, and everything's going to be better. And it doesn't work like that. It's an ongoing process. And I think showing people that they can engage in that process without being judged is the best thing you can do. The reality is, if people don't want to help, all you can do is set an example. You can't control the choices of others, and that's
Mhm.
that's bottom line.
Okay, and you mentioned also something about being realistic, being
Yes.
within the reality. So, how we can maintain reality and on the other side of the coin, also keep the hope up.
Well, I think in every reality there can be hope. Of course, I can think of 1,000 examples in which that's very challenged, mind you. But I think that everyone can improve their mental health with the right information, the right influences, and the right motivation. Um, so some situations are more challenging than others, but I think one of the keys is just being non-judgmental. There's a lot of like cluster B personality disorders, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic personality disorders. They um, they're all born of childhood trauma, and they all have very negative behaviors associated with how they manifest in adults. And one of the key things to treating an individual in those situations is making it very clear you're not judging them as a person. And a lot of times, people with those mental health disorders have very, very low self-esteem. So you have to be very, it's like 10-part praise to 1 part constructive criticism or feedback. But you have to make it very, very clear that you're not judging the individual as a person. You're not judging their worth as a person. You're analyzing their behavior and making it clear that how that, maybe a change in their behavior is in their best interests. And a lot of times people with borderline personality disorder, for instance, have frequent suicidality and will engage in what's called, and I'll get to this in the suicide talk, they'll engage in what's called parasuicidality, in which they'll have suicidal behavior, but one of the movements, or one of the motivations rather, of this behavior is something besides suicide. Typically, it's to make sure they don't feel abandoned, make sure other people care about them.
Mhm.
And so when you're working with someone with that type of disorder, you have to be absolutely clear. You tell it like it is, like, hey, I think you're making suicidal statements because you want to make sure people will respond to you. And and help them recognize that you see that without judgment, and help them recognize that there are safer, more healthy ways, less risky ways to communicate that need of not feeling abandoned, of feeling belonging without suicidality.
That does not sound like an easy job, but it's an important one.
Oh, absolutely. It's not easy, but I think absolutely, as you said, it's important. And helping people understand that, like someone with a personality disorder, they got there largely because of trauma. People with addiction got there largely because of trauma. So judging where they're at because of this, foundational trauma is not helpful. And taking a non-judgmental approach, a safe approach, an honest approach is what people who might be reluctant to treatment would best respond to, in my opinion.
100%. So, I just want to mention that this is the second session of 4 sessions with us. We will dedicate an entire session just to talk about suicide and suicidal issues, and the other one will be about addiction issues. So we're lucky to have all of that experience with us, Ernest.
Awesome.
I'm going to ask our followers on social media, whoever is watching us today, if you got any questions before we wrap up. I'm gonna take a look into our LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Any question, any comment? Okay, seeing none, then in that case, Ernest, thank you so much for your time and effort today, and it's always a pleasure to have you on board with us. Thank you for this fruitful, informative, precise presentation. I'm pretty sure so many people will find it helpful. And if we can save at least only one person with this information, then I would consider myself the luckiest on the world. So thank you so much for this.
You're very welcome. I feel very passionate about these issues, and I feel very strongly that, lots of people can be helped by this information. And so I'm very glad to present.
Thank you so much. And for everyone else, as usual, thank you for being here today with us. And we're looking forward to see you at another session with Rights and Responsibilities Awareness Initiative. Stay well and stay fine, and looking forward to see you at another event.